The Rose of Greenwood. That day, too, Rose opened her diary. April 15, 1921. Today, Greenwood was alive and breathing once more. Rose Washington woke that morning, as she always did, before the sun had fully risen. The view of Greenwood Avenue through her window still made her heart flutter with quiet joy. The red brick buildings caught the early morning light, transforming into warm shades of gold and amber, and from William's tailor shop below, she could already hear the cheerful rhythm of sewing machines beginning their daily symphony. Rose stood by the window, drawing in a slow, deliberate breath. The scent of her mother Clara's biscuits drifted up from the kitchen, mingling with the distant sound of Mrs. Smith singing to her chickens as she scattered their morning feed. All of this was Greenwood's morning, peaceful, warm, and vibrantly alive. "Rose, child, morning's here," came the gentle voice of her father, Dr. Samuel Washington, from the hallway. His voice always carried a particular warmth, perhaps the tenderness that came from years of healing the people of Greenwood, or perhaps simply a father's love for his daughter. Rose slipped out of her nightgown and carefully dressed herself in the blue cotton dress her mother had made for her. Simple yet elegant, with clean lines that spoke of Clara Washington's skill as one of Greenwood's finest seamstresses. Every stitch was perfect, every fold precisely placed. Standing before her mirror, Rose regarded her reflection. 24 years old, with her father's intelligent eyes and her mother's gentle smile. But in those eyes burned something deeper. A love for books, for knowledge, and most of all, for the people who filled her days with purpose and meaning. "Rose, come eat your breakfast," her younger brother Tommy's voice carried up from downstairs. At 16, Tommy was a sophomore at Greenwood High School, dreaming of following in their father's footsteps as a physician. But right now, his attention was clearly focused on more immediate concerns. Rose smiled and made her way down the wooden stairs, each step accompanied by the sight of her mother's carefully tended flower boxes. Small daisies lifted their faces toward the morning light, and red geraniums seemed to wave hello as she passed. The house smelled of coffee and fresh bread, of her father's medical supplies, and something else, something warm and indefinable that meant home. The kitchen was already alive with morning activity. Clara stood at the stove, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath a crisp white headwrap, humming a spiritual as she turned bacon in the iron skillet. The sound was low and melodic, threading through the kitchen like a gentle prayer. Dr. Washington sat at the wooden table, his medical bag beside his chair, reading the Tulsa Star while steam rose from his coffee cup. "Good morning, Papa, Mama." Rose kissed her father's cheek and squeezed her mother's shoulder as she passed. "Morning, my Rose," Dr. Washington murmured, looking up from his newspaper. "Sleep well?" "Yes, Papa. The most peaceful sleep." Rose took her place at the table, across from Tommy, who was already working his way through a plate piled high with biscuits, bacon, and scrambled eggs. "Mrs. Patterson's baby came last night," her father continued, folding the newspaper carefully. "A little girl. Strong lungs, healthy as can be. That makes 3 births this month. Greenwood is growing," Clara said with satisfaction, setting a plate before Rose. "More families, more children. More futures being born right here in our neighborhood." Rose nodded, cutting into her biscuit and watching the butter melt into the warm bread. It was true, Greenwood was thriving. Every week brought new businesses, new families, new dreams taking root in the fertile ground of this remarkable place they called home. The Dreamland Theater, where she'd seen her first moving picture. The Girly Hotel, where traveling musicians and businessmen stayed when they came to visit. The countless shops, restaurants, and offices that lined Greenwood Avenue like pearls on a string. "What's your plan for today, Rose?" her mother asked, settling into her own chair with a smaller plate and a steaming cup of coffee. "The library first, as always. Mrs. Henderson wants me to help her organize the new books that came in from Chicago. Then this afternoon, I'll prepare for tonight's reading lessons." Tommy looked up from his breakfast. "You still teaching Mr. Jackson to read?" "I am. He's doing wonderfully. He can read almost a full page without help now. And Mrs. Cooper is learning to write letters to her sister in Arkansas." Rose's voice carried a note of pride. The evening literacy classes she held in the small back room of the Greenwood Library had started with just 3 students. Now, nearly 20 adults came each week, eager to unlock the worlds that lived between the covers of books. Education, Dr. Washington said quietly, is the finest gift we can give our people. Knowledge is freedom, Rose. Never forget that. I won't, Papa. The morning light grew stronger, streaming through the lace curtains Clara had sewn and casting dancing patterns across the breakfast table. Outside, Greenwood was coming fully awake. Rose could hear the clip-clop of horses pulling delivery wagons, the voices of neighbors calling out morning greetings, the distant sound of children playing in Standpipe Hill Park. After breakfast, Rose gathered her things for the day ahead. Her worn leather satchel, a gift from her father when she'd first taken the job at the library. The small notebook where she recorded her thoughts about her students' progress. A pencil, freshly sharpened. These simple tools were her weapons against ignorance, her instruments of transformation. "I'll walk with you part of the way," Tommy announced, shouldering his school bag. "Got to stop by Peterson's drugstore before school. Mr. Peterson said he might have some work for me after classes." Together, the Washington siblings stepped out into the Greenwood morning. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of honeysuckle from the gardens and the rich aroma of coffee from Morrison's cafe down the street. The brick sidewalks were already busy with people heading to work, to school, to the various enterprises that made Greenwood the thriving community it had become. Rose walked slowly, savoring each moment. She nodded to Mrs. Williams, who was sweeping her front steps. She waved to Dr. Jackson, who was already seeing patients in his office across the street. She paused to admire the new display in the window of Franklin's Dry Goods, where bolts of colorful fabric created a rainbow behind the glass. "It's a beautiful morning," she murmured to Tommy. "Every morning in Greenwood is beautiful," he replied with the confidence of youth. "Papa says this is the finest Negro community in the whole country. Maybe the whole world." Rose smiled at her brother's enthusiasm, but she knew he wasn't wrong. Greenwood was something special. A place where Negro families could build wealth, educate their children, and dream without limits. Here, Dr. Washington was simply the respected physician he'd trained to be. Here, Clara's skill with needle and thread was valued and sought after. Here, Rose could work as a librarian and teacher, using her education to lift up others. They reached the corner where their paths would diverge, Tommy toward the high school, Rose toward the library. The Greenwood Library was a modest building, just 2 stories of red brick with tall windows that let in plenty of light for reading. But to Rose, it was a cathedral, a sanctuary where knowledge lived and dreams took flight. "See you tonight, Rose," Tommy called, already hurrying toward school. "Study hard," she called back, then turned toward the library. Mrs. Henderson was already there, of course. Elderly and silver-haired, with eyes that twinkled behind wire-rimmed spectacles, she had been the head librarian for nearly 15 years. She believed, as Rose did, that books could change lives. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said as Rose pushed through the heavy wooden doors. "The new shipment is in the back room. Poetry, history, and, you'll love this, 3 new novels by Negro authors." Rose's eyes lit up. "Wonderful. Our evening students will be so excited to see them." She hung her shawl on the peg by the door and moved into the familiar embrace of the library. Books lined every wall, their spines creating a tapestry of colors and titles. The smell of paper and binding glue and the faint scent of lemon oil used to polish the wooden shelves. These were the perfumes of Rose's world. As she began unpacking the new books, handling each one with reverence, Rose felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work. Each book was a doorway, each page a path to understanding. In her evening classes, she watched adult faces transform as letters became words. Words became sentences, sentences became stories. She witnessed the miracle of literacy blooming in minds that had been told they were too old, too tired, too set in their ways to learn. But learning never stopped, Rose knew. Age was no barrier to the hungry mind. The morning passed peacefully. Rose cataloged books, helped patrons find what they needed, and prepared materials for the evening's lessons. Mrs. Henderson worked quietly at her desk, occasionally humming the same spirituals that Clara sang in the kitchen. Around noon, as Rose was arranging a display of books about American history, the library door opened with a soft chime. She looked up to see Mr. Elliot, who owned the barbershop 3 blocks down, approaching with a careful expression. "Miss Washington," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Elliot. How can I help you?" He glanced around, making sure they were alone. Mrs. Henderson had stepped out for lunch, and the library was temporarily empty except for Rose. "It's about the talk going around," he said quietly. "About tensions between our part of town and the white sections. Some folks are saying we should be careful. Keep our heads down for a while." Rose felt a small chill run through her, despite the warmth of the spring day. She had heard whispers, of course. Greenwood's success had not gone unnoticed beyond its borders. Some white citizens of Tulsa seemed to view their thriving Negro neighbors with suspicion rather than admiration. "What kind of talk, Mr. Elliot?" "Oh, probably nothing to worry about. You know how people are. Always finding something to grumble about. It's just..." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "We've built something beautiful here, Miss Washington. Something precious. I'd hate for anything to happen to it." Rose nodded slowly. "Greenwood is strong, Mr. Elliot. We're strong, and we have every right to be here, to prosper here." "Yes, ma'am. Of course. You're right." He replaced his hat and managed a smile. "I just wanted to mention it. Your father's a respected man, and people listen to your family. If there's anything we need to know, I'll speak with Papa tonight," Rose promised. "Thank you for telling me." After Mr. Elliot left, Rose stood among the books, feeling the weight of his words. But she pushed the worry aside. Greenwood had faced challenges before and had always emerged stronger. This was their home, their community, their rightful place in the world. The afternoon brought its usual stream of patrons, children checking out adventure stories, mothers seeking recipes and household tips, men looking for newspapers and books about business. Rose helped each person with genuine pleasure, knowing that every book borrowed was a small victory for literacy, for learning, for the betterment of their community. As closing time approached, Rose began preparing for her evening literacy class. She arranged chairs in a circle in the back room, gathered pencils and paper, and selected several simple books for reading practice. Tonight's lesson would focus on writing letters. Many of her students wanted to correspond with family members in other states. The first students began arriving just as the sun was setting, casting long golden shadows through the library windows. Mr. Jackson came first, still wearing his work clothes from the lumberyard. Then Mrs. Cooper, followed by young Sarah Williams, who worked as a seamstress in her mother's shop but had never learned to read. "Good evening, everyone," Rose said warmly as they settled into their seats. "Tonight, we're going to work on letter writing. But first, let's practice reading together." She opened to a page in a simple reader, one that told the story of a family much like their own. "Mr. Jackson, would you like to begin?" The elderly man adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. Slowly, carefully, he began to read. The Washington family lived in a small house on a tree-lined street. Rose listened to his careful pronunciation, her heart full of pride. Just 6 months ago, Mr. Jackson had been unable to read a single word. Now he was reading fluently, his confidence growing with each sentence. As the lesson continued, Rose felt the familiar joy that came from teaching. These adults, who worked hard all day to support their families, came to her in the evening with eager minds and humble hearts. They trusted her to guide them into the world of letters and words, and she did not take that trust lightly. "Very good, Mrs. Cooper," she encouraged as the older woman struggled through a paragraph. "Remember, take your time. Each word is a stepping stone to the next." The evening passed quickly. By the time Rose was bidding her students good night, the spring air had cooled, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She locked the library carefully, checking each window and door, then began her walk home through the quiet streets of Greenwood. The neighborhood settled into evening peace around her. Lights glowed warmly in windows, and she could hear families gathering for dinner, children being called in from play, the distant sound of piano music drifting from someone's parlor. All the sounds of home, of community, of people living full and meaningful lives. When she reached the Washington house, Rose found her family gathered in the front parlor. Dr. Washington was reading medical journals, Tommy was working on homework, and Clara was mending a dress by lamplight. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly normal, that Rose almost forgot Mr. Elliott's warning from earlier in the day. "How was the lesson tonight?" her father asked, looking up from his reading. "Wonderful." Mr. Jackson read 3 full pages without help. Mrs. Cooper is starting to write in cursive. And Sarah Williams is reading at a 4th grade level now. "The Lord's work," Clara said softly, not looking up from her sewing. "Teaching folks to read is the Lord's work for certain." Rose settled into her favorite chair by the window and opened her diary. The leather cover was worn smooth from daily use, and the pages were filled with her careful handwriting, observations about her students, thoughts about books she'd read, reflections on life in Greenwood. She dated the page, April 15, 1921. "Today was a day of small victories," she wrote. "Mr. Jackson's reading improves each week, and I can see the confidence growing in his eyes. Mrs. Cooper asked me today if I thought she was too old to learn to write poetry. I told her that a heart full of stories is never too old to share them. Mr. Elliott came by the library with worries about tensions with the white sections of town. I should speak with Papa about this, though I suspect he knows more than he said. Greenwood is strong, but we must be wise as well. Tonight I am grateful for this community we have built, for the trust my students place in me, and for the endless possibility that lives within every book, every lesson, every mind eager to learn." Rose paused in her writing and looked around the comfortable parlor. Her father's steady breathing as he read, her mother's gentle humming, Tommy's pencil scratching across his slate. These were the sounds of her world. Safe, familiar, precious. Outside the window, Greenwood Avenue stretched away into the darkness, lined with the homes and businesses of people who had built something remarkable here. A place where Negro families could thrive, where children could dream of any future they chose, where education and enterprise flourished side by side. Rose smiled and returned to her diary. "Tomorrow I will teach, and my students will learn, and Greenwood will continue to grow and prosper. This is the life I have chosen, and I am grateful for every moment of it." She closed the diary and prepared for bed, her heart full of contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others. And she would meet each one with the quiet determination that had carried her this far. As she drifted toward sleep, Rose listened to the peaceful sounds of Greenwood settling into night. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its varied song. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the elm tree outside her window. All was well in her world. And Rose slept, dreaming of books and students and the endless possibilities that tomorrow would bring to the community she loved.